An arrogant businessman, obsessed with meritocracy, sees his worldview collapse when he meets a teacher in a poor neighborhood school. She challenges him with wisdom, refuses his money, and reveals that knowledge belongs to everyone. From that encounter, he abandons luxury to plant libraries where once there was only silence. The Londoner morning sun illuminated the triplex penthouse atop the tallest building on Canary Wharf. Roger Allister, 58, observed the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office. "London at my feet," he thought, as he slowly sipped premium coffee imported directly from Colombia. His business empire, the Allister Group, was a powerhouse in the British market, with branches throughout Latin America. "Excuse me, Mr. Allister, your team is already in the meeting room." The voice of Cecily, his executive assistant for over 15 years, interrupted his thoughts. "I'm coming. Prepare another coffee, and tell Mark from accounting that I want the quarterly figures revised by the end of the day." Cecily merely nodded, accustomed to her boss's imperative tone. Roger tolerated no questioning, much less excuses for subpar results. He was known in the market as the Ruthless, a nickname he secretly took pride in. As he walked through the mirrored corridors of his corporate floor, employees adjusted their posture and rehearsed forced smiles. Fear was the fuel that kept his company running with Swiss watch precision. For Roger, it was simple: the strong prosper, the weak succumb. His motto, repeated in every interview and motivational speech: "Misery is the child of laziness. Those who want, achieve." In the meeting room, 8 executives awaited him anxiously, all impeccably dressed, with organized folders and attentive expressions. Roger entered without greetings. "Third quarter results are below expectations. I want concrete explanations, not excuses." Andrew Davies, the finance director, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, the national economic climate hasn't been favorable. Rising inflation and—" "Stop." Roger raised his hand. "I'm tired of these macroeconomic justifications. The same economy that supposedly harms us didn't prevent silver construction from increasing its profit by 17% in the same period. The problem isn't out there, it's in here." Silence hung heavy in the room. Roger continued, relentless. "I want a restructuring plan by Friday. Staff cuts, process optimization. Do whatever it takes to recover our margin." Later that day, in his executive suite on the top floor, Roger was giving an interview for Entrepreneurs of Britain magazine. The journalist, a woman in her early 30s, seemed genuinely fascinated by his journey. "You came from a middle-class family in rural England, and today you are one of the richest men in the country. What's the secret?" Roger smiled, repeating the speech he had perfected over the years. "There's no secret, there's work. While my college classmates were at parties, I was studying. While they slept, I worked. The formula is simple: discipline, focus, and zero tolerance for mediocrity." "And what do you think about government social programs? Creating crutches for those who should learn to walk on their own." His tone was definitive. "I am living proof that anyone can succeed in this country. I didn't need quotas, subsidies, or favors, just determination." The journalist seemed uncomfortable but proceeded, "Is there any social project you support?" "My company employs over 5,000 people. That is my social project. I teach the value of work, not dependence." After the interview, Roger received a call from Paula Weston, his public relations manager. "The interview was excellent, Mr. Allister, but we have a pending matter. The inauguration of that community library in Willow Creek. You had promised to attend, remember?" Roger frowned. He vaguely recalled agreeing to something of the sort during a charity event months ago, probably after a few glasses of champagne, in a moment of weakness. "Cancel it. I'm busy." "Sir, we've already confirmed with the press. The project received a small donation from the Allister Institute. It would be strategically bad not to attend, especially after that report questioning your social commitment." Roger sighed. Public relations was a tedious game, but a necessary one. "How long will it take?" "Only an hour. Photos, a short speech cutting the ribbon, and then you can proceed to the meeting at the Regent Club." "So be it. But I don't want to spend a minute longer than necessary in that place." When he hung up, Roger turned his attention back to the window. London stretched out as far as the eye could see, a concrete jungle where he reigned supreme. He thought of the thousands of individuals struggling on the streets below, many of them consuming his company's products, sustaining his empire. People who, in his view, simply hadn't been determined enough to achieve what he had. That night, in his Kensington mansion, Roger dined alone. His ex-wife had left years ago, tired of his work obsession. His only son was studying at Harvard, more interested in his future inheritance than in any genuine relationship with his father. But Roger didn't care. Solitude was the price of success, and he paid it without regret. As he savored an award-winning red wine, he received the dossier about the community library he would visit the next morning. Project SAO, a ridiculously idealistic name. He quickly flipped through the information, a local initiative improvised in an old warehouse led by Antonia Hayes, 32, a literature graduate from the University of London. Another dreamer, he thought with disdain, closing the folder. People like her deeply irritated him, intellectuals who wasted their potential on lost causes instead of building something concrete in the real world. Before going to bed, Roger checked his stock prices and sent some urgent messages to his international director. On the next day's agenda, after the tiresome visit to the periphery, he would have a decisive meeting for the acquisition of a mining company in Chile. This indeed was a matter worthy of his time and attention. What Roger didn't know, as he fell asleep in his Egyptian cotton sheets, was that the brief deviation in his meticulously planned routine, a visit to a small social project in the periphery of London, was about to shake the foundations of everything he considered absolute truth. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. Roger's armored Mercedes wound through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, completely clashing with the local landscape. Beside him, Paula nervously checked her watch. "We're late, Mr. Allister. The press must already be there." Roger barely listened. He uncomfortably observed the scene unfolding through the tinted window. Children playing ball in vacant lots, small makeshift shops, colorful clothes hung on lines between unfinished buildings. "How much longer in this labyrinth?" he asked, impatient. "We'll arrive in 5 minutes. The driver is following the GPS." When they finally stopped in front of a renovated warehouse, Roger sighed. The freshly painted facade displayed a colorful mural with the name Project SAO in stylized letters. A small crowd awaited at the entrance, including some reporters and photographers. "Remember, just a brief speech about the importance of education, a few photos and we're free to go," Paula instructed, adjusting Roger's tie before he exited the vehicle. As soon as he stepped onto the pavement, Roger assumed his public persona. A calibrated smile, confident posture, a firm handshake. The small crowd seemed genuinely impressed by his presence, which fed his ego. Cameras flashed as he was led inside the warehouse. The interior surprised him. He expected to find an improvised and precarious environment, but there was organization and care in every detail. Well-built shelves housed catalogued books, study tables occupied the central space, and the walls displayed maps, scientific illustrations, and student artwork. "Mr. Allister, welcome to Project SAO." The confident female voice made him turn. Antonia Hayes was not what he expected. No trace of subservience or dazzlement in her gaze. She was dressed simply but elegantly. Linen trousers, a white shirt, and a colorful beaded necklace that appeared handcrafted. Her curly hair framed a face with striking features, and her dark brown eyes met his with a mix of courtesy and critical analysis. "Miss Hayes, I presume," he replied, extending his hand. "Impressive what you've managed to do here, considering the limitations." "Limitations are relative, sir. They don't always depend on material resources, but on the will to transform." Her Portuguese was impeccable, articulated with the precision of someone who masters the language beyond formal conventions. "Would you like to see our space?" Before Roger could reply, Paula intervened. "We have a tight schedule. Perhaps we could go straight to the inauguration ceremony." "Certainly," Antonia agreed. "But it would be a shame for Mr. Allister not to see the heart of our project. After all, his institute contributed to its existence." Roger noticed the slight tone of irony. His contribution had been minimal, an amount that made no difference to him, but which Paula had insisted was strategically important for the group's image. "Let's take a quick tour," he decided to Paula's surprise. Something in Antonia's challenging demeanor had piqued his curiosity. As they walked through the space, Antonia explained the project's dynamics. It wasn't just a library, but an interdisciplinary training center. Children and adolescents had access to classes in literature, philosophy, science, mathematics, arts, and languages. Languages? Here, Roger questioned, skeptical. «Le sorprende que enseñemos español en nuestra comunidad», she replied fluently in Spanish, before continuing. «We also offer English classes, and some of our students are already fluent». Impressed, but determined not to show it, Roger observed a group of teenagers poring over complex mathematical equations. And do these young people really understand what they're studying? Why don't you ask them? Challenged, Roger approached the table. A boy of approximately 14 years old confidently explained the theorem he was solving. It wasn't just mechanical repetition, there was conceptual understanding. "Where did you learn that?" Roger asked. "From Ms. Hayes in the books here," the boy replied proudly. "I want to be an engineer one day." Roger nodded, perplexed. His worldview did not encompass this reality. Young people from the periphery mastering knowledge he associated only with educational elites. Continuing the tour, they arrived at a smaller, more secluded room. There, in a glass dome on a special stand, rested an old book. It looked like a leather-bound manuscript, with golden inscriptions on the cover. "What is this?" Roger asked, genuinely intrigued. Antonia's eyes sparkled with special enthusiasm. "This, Mr. Alistair, is the Aruanda manuscript, a unique codex that combines knowledge from various Brazilian traditions, indigenous, African, and European. It was compiled by a group of Brazilian intellectuals in the late 19th century. People who believed that true knowledge transcended social and racial barriers." Roger approached the manuscript. The pages displayed texts in multiple languages, intricate diagrams, and detailed illustrations. "How did this end up here?" he asked, lightly touching the dome. "It was donated to our community by an old family who understood its true purpose. This manuscript doesn't belong in museums or private collections. Its value lies in its use, in the transmission of knowledge." Paula interrupted the moment. "Mr. Alistair, the journalists are waiting for the official ceremony." Annoyed at having his curiosity interrupted, Roger proceeded to the outdoor area, where a small tribune had been set up. He mechanically delivered a speech about the importance of education for the country's development, ready-made phrases his press officer had prepared. Throughout the speech, he noticed Antonia observing him with an analytical expression, as if she could see through his rehearsed facade. This deeply bothered him. After the ceremony, as he prepared to leave, Roger approached Antonia again. "I'm curious about the manuscript. It must have significant value. Have you considered selling it to fund the project's expansion?" Antonia smiled, a serene and firm smile. "The Aruanda manuscript is priceless, Mr. Alistair. It's not a commodity, it's a heritage of consciousness. The knowledge it contains is not merchandise. It is humanity's legacy." Something in the way she uttered those words provoked an unexpected reaction in Roger, a mix of irritation and fascination. "All knowledge has a price, Ms. Antonia. It's a matter of finding the right value." That's a very limited view for a man who built an empire, don't you think? Some things exist beyond market valuations. Before he could retort, Roger was surrounded by journalists with questions about his presence at the site. When he finally managed to extricate himself and return to the car, something had changed within him. A subtle unease, like a small stone in the shoe of his unshakable certainty. "It took longer than expected," Paula complained, getting into the vehicle after him. "But the photos turned out excellent. They're already circulating on social media with great reception." Roger remained silent, watching the receding warehouse through the window. He saw Antonia chatting animatedly with a group of children, her face illuminated by a conviction he rarely witnessed in his circle of executives and partners. As the Mercedes sped back to London's financial centre, her words echoed in his mind. "Knowledge is not a commodity. It is humanity's legacy." A statement so contrary to everything he believed, so opposite to the world he had built, that it paradoxically fascinated him. The following weeks were uncharacteristically disturbing for Roger Alistair. During crucial meetings, he found himself thinking about the Aruanda manuscript. At night, Antonia's firm words invaded his thoughts. challenging convictions he had nurtured for decades. That visit to Willow Creek, which should have been merely a protocolary event, had turned into a stone in the shoe of his meticulously planned routine. "Mr. Alistair, are you listening to us?" The voice of Serge, his legal director, brought him back to the reality of the meeting room. "Yes, of course. The mining company acquisition. Continue." The executives exchanged worried glances. It was uncharacteristic for the CEO to lose focus during strategic discussions. After the meeting, Cecily entered his office hesitantly. "Sir, are you all right? You've cancelled 3 appointments this week and still haven't reviewed the quarterly reports." "I'm perfectly fine," he replied dryly. "Just prioritizing more urgent matters." When he was alone, Roger opened his notebook and typed, "Aruanda manuscript." Nothing relevant appeared in the results. He tried variations: Brazilian Codex 19th century, Brazilian Traditions manuscript, some academic references. Nothing specific about the document he had seen. That intrigued him. In his experience, any item of value had available information, specialists, appraisals. How could a seemingly so significant manuscript remain obscure? Later that day in his apartment, as he savored a 30-year-old whiskey, Roger made a decision. He called Dr. Paul Rivers, an antiquarian and appraiser of rare works, who occasionally advised him on acquisitions for his private collection. "Paul, I need a discreet appraisal of a manuscript, 19th century probably, a combination of Brazilian traditions. It's called the Aruanda manuscript." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Alistair, are you serious? The Aruanda manuscript? You know it?" "I know the legends. A codex compiled by a secret group of Brazilian intellectuals, bringing together knowledge from the cultural matrices that shaped the country. Many consider it just a myth. Others, like me, believe it existed but was lost or fragmented. If you've really located it, what would it be worth in your opinion?" Another silence. "Impossible to say without examining it, but if it's authentic and complete, we're talking about a priceless piece. Not just monetarily, it would be a national, cultural treasure." After hanging up, Roger felt a wave of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. A hunt worthy of his intellect and resources. A challenge fitting his determination. The next morning, contrary to his schedule, he drove personally to Willow Creek. Without an entourage, without the press, without the usual shield of assistance. He parked his imported car a few blocks before Project So, feeling strangely exposed as he walked through the neighborhood streets. The warehouse was bustling. Children of different ages entered and exited, carrying books and materials. Upon entering, Roger noticed curious glances. Clearly, a man in an impeccable Italian suit was not a common sight there. A young volunteer approached him. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for Antonia Hayes." "Ms. Hayes is in the advanced studies room that way." She pointed to a side corridor. Roger found her guiding a small group of teenagers who were animatedly discussing a text. Antonia looked up and couldn't hide her surprise upon recognizing him. "Mr. Alistair, what an unexpected visit. Can we talk privately?" She nodded, briefly instructed the students to continue their activity, and led him to a small room that served as an administrative office. "How can I help you?" she asked, indicating a simple chair. There was no subservience in her tone, just polite cordiality. "I've come to make a proposal." Roger was direct, as in his business negotiations. "I want to buy the Aruanda manuscript." Antonia showed no surprise, as if she had already expected this move. "As I've already told you, the manuscript is not for sale." "Everything has a price. I'm willing to offer £1 million. Antonia smiled slightly. "Mr. Alistair, do you think we don't understand the value of what we have here? The manuscript is worth much more than that, even by the market metrics you revere." $2 million, then. Roger had never been rejected in a negotiation. The challenge only increased his interest. "And an additional donation of $3 million for Project So." Antonia stood up and walked to the window, watching the children playing in the courtyard. "You really don't understand, do you? It's not about money. The Aruanda manuscript represents something money cannot buy. Cultural continuity, resistance to erasure, knowledge as a common good." She turned to face him. "What do you intend to do with it, if you acquire it?" The question caught him off guard. "Add it to my private collection. perhaps eventually donate it to some institution. And meanwhile, it would remain locked in some vault, inaccessible, sterile. Knowledge without circulation is like stagnant water. It stagnates. Roger felt uncomfortably challenged. He wasn't used to having his intentions questioned. "Miss Antonia, I am a pragmatic man. 5 million. That's my final offer." She observed him for a few moments as if studying a complex equation. "I'd like to show you something, Mr. Alistair, if you would accompany me." Intrigued, he followed her through the warehouse to a back room. There, a group of elderly community members taught craft techniques to young children. The scene was one of a harmony that seemed strangely alien to Roger, different generations collaborating without apparent hierarchies. "See that lady?" Antonia pointed to an elderly black woman with white hair tied in a colorful turban. "Ms. Jurema. At 87, she held in her memory stories and songs her formerly enslaved grandparents taught her, stories not found in any schoolbook. Here we record these memories. They are being integrated into an appendix of the manuscript." They continued walking. In another room, teenagers were digitizing old documents on computers. "We are creating a digital version of the manuscript, enriched with community contributions. Living, expanding knowledge, the opposite of a collector's item." Roger watched, torn between irritation at the refusal of his offer and a reluctant fascination with what he was witnessing. "And that room?" he asked, indicating a space where several people worked concentrated. "Our community science lab. We are documenting local medicinal knowledge and comparing it with the manuscript's records on native plants. We've already identified properties that the pharmaceutical industry is still discovering." Finally, they returned to the room where the manuscript was displayed. Antonia carefully opened the dome and, to Roger's surprise, removed the codex. "Would you like to see it up close?" Hesitantly, he extended his hands. The manuscript was heavier than he imagined. He felt the texture of the ancient leather, observed the yellowed pages covered in meticulous calligraphy in various languages. Astronomical diagrams interspersed with botanical representations and philosophical texts. "This is extraordinary," he murmured, genuinely impressed. "Who wrote it?" "A collective. Indigenous people, freed black individuals, European dissidents, people whom official history relegated to the margins, but who produced invaluable knowledge. This manuscript is proof that wisdom is not the privilege of the powerful." Her words struck him with unexpected force. "So, your answer is definitely no." "My answer is, the manuscript already has a home. It's not abandoned to be rescued nor lost to be found. It is exactly where it should be." Roger returned the codex, feeling strangely defeated. Never in his entire business career had he encountered something his money couldn't buy. "Can I at least study it? Learn more about it?" The request came out spontaneously, surprising them both. Antonia smiled, now with genuine approval. "That, Mr. Alistair, is a proposal I can accept. The manuscript is open to everyone who wishes to learn, including you." The Alistair group was abuzz with rumors. For 3 consecutive weeks, Roger had reorganized his schedule to include free afternoons, something unprecedented in his 30-year career. When questioned, he claimed personal matters, an expression that had never been part of his business vocabulary. His directors whispered about possible health issues or perhaps a new secret venture. That afternoon, as his driver took him back to Willow Creek, Roger mentally reviewed his strategy for the manuscript. Initially, he intended to study it just enough to determine its true value and find a way to acquire it. However, with each visit, that initial motivation transformed into something different, something he couldn't or didn't want to name yet. "We've arrived, sir," the driver announced, parking a few blocks from Project So. Roger insisted on this distance, preferring to walk the rest of the way. He felt increasingly comfortable on those streets he would once have considered dangerous or unworthy of his presence. At the project, the children already knew him. Some greeted him by name, without the Mr. that he so valued in his corporate environment. Strangely, this didn't bother him as much as it should have. "Good afternoon, Mr. Roger." A boy of approximately 10 years old ran up to him. "Ms. Hayes said you were coming today. She's waiting in the manuscript room." Roger nodded, suppressing a smile. There was something in the carefree enthusiasm of those children that began to pierce the armor of formality he had built over decades. In the room dedicated to the Aruanda manuscript, he found Antonia talking with an elderly man with indigenous features. "Mr. Alistair, allow me to introduce Professor Karui. He is one of the few living specialists in Brazilian indigenous languages and is helping us translate some passages of the manuscript." The elderly man greeted him with a surprisingly firm handshake. "The manuscript contains passages in at least 5 different indigenous languages," Karui explained. "Linguistic records we considered lost." Professor Karui believes he has found references to a Tupi-Guarani mathematical system that preceded many calculations attributed to European mathematicians, Antonia added. Roger observed the elderly man with growing curiosity. In his world, specialists like that would be treated as eccentric curiosities, never as legitimate sources of knowledge. "How did you become interested in this field of study?" he asked, genuinely interested. "I was born in a village in a remote reserve in British Columbia," Karui replied. "I was discovered by anthropologists who brought me to study in London. I learned your languages and sciences, but I never forgot ours. The problem is, you call your knowledge science and ours folklore." The observation hit Roger like an unexpected punch. He recognized in those simple words an uncomfortable truth about his own prejudices. "Well, today we'll continue analyzing the section on astronomy," Antonia interrupted, noticing the impact of the conversation. "If you'd like to join us, Mr. Alistair." In the following hours, Roger immersed himself in the study of celestial maps that combined precise astronomical observations with cosmological interpretations from different cultures. Karui explained indigenous calendar systems of surprising accuracy, while Antonia drew parallels with African astronomical knowledge recorded in the manuscript. "It's extraordinary how these different traditions arrived at similar conclusions through completely distinct paths," Roger commented, genuinely impressed. "Perhaps because truth is not the exclusive property of any single culture," Antonia replied with a subtle smile. When Karui left to attend other commitments, Roger and Antonia continued studying the manuscript. At a certain point, he noticed a passage in Latin that seemed out of context. "This looks like a quote from Seneca, but it's modified," he observed, leaning over the text. Antonia looked at him with genuine surprise. "I didn't know you knew classical Latin." "I studied at a Jesuit college. Classics was my favorite subject before I decided it was more practical to focus on economics and administration." "Why didn't you pursue that interest?" Roger paused, surprised by his own hesitation. No one had asked him that kind of question for decades. "My father used to say that philosophy and literature were for those without real ambition. Let the poor dream of ideas while we build the concrete world," he would say. Antonia observed him attentively. "And you believed him?" "It wasn't a question, but an observation." "It worked, didn't it? I built an empire." "At what cost?" The question hung in the air, too uncomfortable to be answered immediately. Roger averted his gaze to the manuscript, as if he could find refuge there. "This modification in Seneca's text," he said, pointing to the passage they had discussed earlier, "such an interpretation that contradicts the original, as if the author were dialoguing with Seneca across the centuries." "Exactly," Antonia animatedly responded. "Knowledge is neither static nor sacred. It is a constant dialogue, a collective construction that transcends time and space. That is precisely what the Aruanda manuscript represents." The afternoon advanced, and before they knew it, it was evening. Roger was surprised to realize he had spent hours completely absorbed in study, without checking his phone once, something unthinkable in his normal routine. "I need to go," he finally said, checking his watch. As he walked towards the exit, he passed a room where some teenagers were engaged in a heated debate. Curious, he stopped to observe. "What are they discussing?" he asked Antonia, who accompanied him. "Political philosophy. We are analyzing different economic systems and their ethical implications." Roger couldn't resist and entered the room, introducing himself to the young people. To his surprise, they knew him. "You own that group that bought the factory that closed here in the neighborhood last year, don't you?" asked a girl of approximately 16 years old. Roger felt a sudden discomfort. Indeed, his group had acquired and closed a small textile factory in the region, transferring production to an automated unit in another state. A purely economic decision that, in his business logic, made perfect sense. "Yes, that was me." "Why did you close it?" "My mother worked there. She was unemployed for 6 months." The direct question, without hostility but laden with real consequence, completely disarmed him. In his office, numbers and percentages in spreadsheets had no faces or stories. It was a strategic decision. Production centralization, economy of scale. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Economy for whom? Asked another teenager. Because here in the neighborhood, the economy collapsed after the factory closed. Antonia intervened gently. Perhaps Mr. Alistair could share his perspective in the next political economy class. It would be valuable to have different points of view. To his own surprise, Roger nodded. I could, yes. As he left the project, walking slowly towards where his driver awaited him, Roger felt strangely exposed. As if, for the first time in decades, he saw the concrete impact of decisions he made daily without hesitation. His phone vibrated. It was Cecily, reminding him of the board meeting the next morning. Urgent matters, pending acquisitions, strategic decisions. His usual world called him back. However, something had changed. A fissure had opened in the solid structure of his certainties, and through that fissure, he began to glimpse a world far more complex than his cynical pragmatism had ever admitted. The British financial press was the first to notice that something significant was happening with Roger Alistair. After decades of maintaining a predictable public agenda, the businessman began declining invitations to priority corporate events without offering convincing justifications. Rumors about health problems, family crisis, or even confidential investigations began to circulate. At the group's headquarters, the tension was palpable. Strategic meetings were postponed or conducted with an unprecedented distraction from the CEO. Expansion projects that would previously have been approved without hesitation now faced unsettling questions. Mr. Alistair, we need to finalize the acquisition of the hospital network before the end of the month, insisted Gus Miller, Director of New Business. Investors are anxious. Roger observed the report in front of him with a thoughtful expression. What is the impact on public services in the region? The question caught everyone by surprise. Never in any previous negotiation had Roger shown concern for social impacts external to the financial balance sheet. I don't understand the question, sir, Gus replied, confused. It's simple. If we privatize these hospitals, what happens to the people who depend on subsidized services? An awkward silence filled the meeting room. Well, that wasn't part of our initial analysis, but I can request a complementary study, the director offered, disconcerted. Do that. We won't proceed without fully understanding the social consequences of the operation. When the meeting ended, Richard Vance, co-founder and long-time friend, remained in the room. What's happening to you, Roger? For weeks you've seemed like a different person. Everyone is talking. Roger looked at his friend with a serene expression that Richard didn't recognize. Perhaps I am, finally, beginning to see the full picture. What picture? We built this group following clear rules. Efficiency, profitability, growth. It always worked. Worked for whom? The question echoed in the empty room, leaving Richard without an immediate answer. That afternoon, contrary to all expectations, Roger personally attended a debate on education in vulnerable communities at the University of London. In the crowded auditorium, he sat discreetly in the last row, without the usual entourage of assistants and security. Among the speakers, Dr. Antonia Hayes represented Project SO. The real barrier is not intellectual capacity, but access, she explained to the audience. When we build bridges between traditional and academic knowledge, we discover extraordinary potential in places that the formal educational system has abandoned. After the lecture, during the Q&A session, Roger surprised everyone by raising his hand. Dr. Hayes, considering your practical experience, what would be the 3 most effective actions the private sector could implement to democratize access to knowledge? A murmur went through the auditorium as people recognized the famous businessman. Antonia, however, showed no surprise. First, recognize that knowledge is not just what is produced in elite universities, but also what is preserved in traditional communities. Second, invest in open access digital infrastructure, not as charity but as an integral part of corporate responsibility. Third, and perhaps most difficult, completely rethink the concept of intellectual property, transforming patents and copyrights into tools of access, not restriction. Roger nodded, carefully noting every word, a gesture that would not go unnoticed by the journalists present. Days later, Business Weekly published an article titled "The Magnate's Metamorphosis," analyzing Roger's apparent change in stance. The market reacted nervously. The Alistair Group's shares fluctuated, reflecting uncertainty about the company's future under a possible new management philosophy. In response, the administrative board called an extraordinary meeting. In the sumptuous hall of the corporate headquarters, directors and majority shareholders openly expressed their concern. "Roger, we've been friends for decades, but I need to be frank," began Ernest Goodwin, chairman of the board. "Your recent actions are affecting market confidence. Statements about social responsibility and community impact have never been part of our organizational culture." "And perhaps that's exactly the problem," Roger replied, with a tranquility that disconcerted everyone. "We built an empire based on incomplete metrics." "What are you talking about? Our profits have consistently increased over the past 15 years. Profits for whom? At what cost? These are questions we never asked ourselves." The meeting quickly deteriorated into veiled accusations and subtle threats. In the end, a deadline was set. Roger would have 30 days to reconsider his strategic vision, or face a vote of no confidence that could remove him from the executive chairmanship. That night in his apartment, Roger sat in his personal office, surrounded by symbols of success that now seemed strangely empty to him. Awards, certificates, photos with politicians and celebrities, testimonies of a trajectory that suddenly no longer brought him the satisfaction it once did. His phone rang. It was Antonia. "I heard about the ultimatum," she said without preamble. "It's in the papers. News travels fast. What do you intend to do?" Roger hesitated. It was a question he had been asking himself. "I don't know yet. I've spent decades building this group. It's my work, my legacy." "Legacies can be rebuilt, reimagined." A brief silence. "Why are you calling me, Antonia? I'm not exactly a natural ally of your work." "But you could be." Her voice conveyed a serene conviction. "Come to the project tomorrow. There's something I need to show you." The next morning, ignoring a packed schedule of corporate commitments, Roger drove to Willow Creek. Project Sao seemed different, more alive, more integrated into his consciousness. He recognized faces, remembered names, felt for the first time part of that microcosm. Antonia led him to a room he hadn't visited before. There, young people and adults participated in a community planning workshop. "This is the new social entrepreneurship hub," she explained. "Inspired by the Arwanda manuscript, we are developing business models that balance financial sustainability with positive impact." Roger observed the participants, people whom, in another context, he would never have considered as potential entrepreneurs or leaders. "See that gentleman," Antonia continued, discreetly indicating a middle-aged man. "Mr. Joachim. He worked at the textile factory your group closed. Now he's developing a seamstresses cooperative that uses traditional techniques from Quilombola communities to create contemporary fashion. They've already secured 3 contracts with independent brands." The information hit Roger with unforeseen force. That man, who could easily have been just a number on a layoff spreadsheet, had innovatively rebuilt his professional life. "How do they finance these projects?" "With difficulty," Antonia admitted. "We work with collaborative microfinance, specific partnerships, but the potential is limited by resources." Roger immediately understood where that conversation would lead, but surprisingly, he didn't feel the usual cynicism he reserved for funding requests. "I'm not here to ask for money," Antonia clarified, as if reading his thoughts. "I'm here to offer you a perspective. The business world doesn't have to be a battlefield where only the strongest survive. It can be an ecosystem where different forms of value are recognized and cultivated." Roger remained silent, absorbing those words. In his mind, a possibility began to take shape that, weeks ago, he would never have considered. "I need to think," he finally said. "There's a lot at stake." On the way back to the city center, his phone didn't stop ringing. Calls from directors, shareholders, journalists. The empire he had built demanded answers, demanded his presence, demanded that he return to who he had always been. But something fundamental had changed within him. The Arwanda manuscript, with its fusion of diverse knowledge, had planted a seed that now blossomed into an existential question. What kind of legacy did he truly want to leave? The Alistair Group headquarters had never been as agitated as on that Monday morning. Journalists crowded the lobby, shareholders arrived in a hurry, and a palpable tension hung in the air-conditioned luxury building. The extraordinary board meeting, called by Roger, had been announced with only 24 hours' notice, an unprecedented breach of company protocols. Cecily, his longtime assistant, awaited him at the entrance to the meeting room with a worried expression. "Mr. Alistair, everyone is already here. The atmosphere is not favorable." Roger nodded, adjusting his tie. He was surprisingly calm for someone about to make the most controversial decision of his career. "Any news about Dr. Paul Rivers?" he asked, referring to the only external guest he had requested for the meeting. "He just arrived. He's in the waiting room as you instructed." Perfect. Upon entering the meeting room, he faced glances that oscillated between concern, curiosity, and declared hostility. The murmuring ceased immediately. Roger walked to the head of the table, but did not sit in the imposing presidential chair he had occupied for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for your presence at this extraordinary convocation. Over the past 35 years, we have together built one of the largest corporations in the country. Today, however, we are not here to discuss acquisitions or mergers. We are here to redefine the concept of value." Richard Vance, his longest-serving partner, interrupted. "Roger, if this is another of your recent philosophical ramblings, I suggest you consider the delicate situation the company's shares are facing in the market." Murmurs of approval ran around the table. "They are not ramblings, Richard. It is a fundamental strategic reevaluation." Roger paused before continuing. "In recent months, I have faced a simple question, one that completely changed my perspective. What does it truly mean to generate value?" Roger activated the projection system. On the screen appeared the financial balance sheet of the last 5 years. Impressive numbers that demonstrated the group's continuous growth. These are the indicators by which we have always measured our success: operating profit, market value, return to shareholders. Impressive, no doubt, but incomplete. With a gesture, he changed the presentation. Now graphs appeared showing social inequality in the regions where the group operated, statistics on labor precarity, environmental impacts. This is the other face of our business model, the face we deliberately chose to ignore. Ernest Goodwin, chairman of the board, stood up. "This is absurd, Roger. We are not an NGO. We are a company with fiduciary responsibility to our investors." "Exactly, Ernest. And it is this narrow view of responsibility that I intend to question today." Roger then presented a document that surprised everyone, his formal proposal for a complete restructuring of the Alistair Group. The plan included the creation of a social investment fund linked to the company's profits, redirection of resources for research into sustainable technologies, revision of hiring policies with a focus on diversity and local development, and, the most controversial point, the gradual transformation of corporate governance to include representatives from communities impacted by the group's operations. The reaction was immediate and tempestuous. "That's corporate communism. It will destroy everything we've built. Shareholders will never accept it." Roger patiently waited for tempers to cool. 6 months ago, I would have reacted exactly as you are. But something happened. I found knowledge that cannot be measured in spreadsheets or market valuations. It was then that Roger gestured to Cecily, who opened the door for Dr. Paul Rivers, the lawyer who handled his personal affairs, and, to general astonishment, Dr. Antonia Hayes. "Allow me to introduce Dr. Antonia Hayes, coordinator of Project SO, and Dr. Paul Rivers, who will assist in explaining the legal aspects of what I propose." Antonia's presence generated new murmurs. Some executives already recognized her from recent news, associating her with Roger. Rumors about his involvement with social projects now took on more concrete and threatening outlines for the company's traditional structure. "What is this social activist doing in a confidential meeting of our board?" questioned Ernest, barely concealing his disdain. "Dr. Antonia represents a perspective that has been absent from our discussions for too long," Roger replied calmly, "and she is co-author of the proposal I am presenting." The indignation was almost palpable. Some board members threatened to withdraw. Before you make any hasty decisions, Roger continued, I'd like Paul to explain the group's current shareholding situation. The lawyer took the floor, presenting documents that caused instant commotion. In recent weeks, Roger had discreetly increased his shareholding, buying available shares on the market at a premium price. With this, he had consolidated a majority position that, combined with the allies he still held on the board, guaranteed the approval of practically any proposal he presented. That's market manipulation, protested a director. On the contrary, Paul corrected, all operations were registered with the competent authorities with absolute transparency. Mr. Alistair simply exercised his right to acquire shares in his own company. After minutes of heated discussion, Richard, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. Roger, we built this group from nothing. 35 years of work. What happened to you? The tone was no longer accusatory, but one of genuine perplexity. Roger approached his longtime friend. I've learned that there are different forms of wealth, Richard, and the greatest of them is not kept in vaults or shares. It was then that Antonia took the floor, with a serenity that contrasted with the tense atmosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not here proposing the end of capitalism or the dissolution of your corporate empire. We are proposing its evolution, a model that integrates profitability with genuine responsibility, not as a marketing strategy, but as a structural philosophy. To everyone's surprise, she opened a folder and distributed concrete examples of global companies that had implemented similar models, with surprisingly positive results, not only in terms of social impact, but also long-term financial sustainability. The market is changing, she continued. Consumers, especially the new generations, demand more from corporations. Transparency, ethics, purpose. Adapting is not just a moral issue, but also a strategic one. After 3 hours of intense debate, the meeting concluded without definitive consensus, but with a committee appointed to analyze the proposal in detail. It was more than Roger expected to achieve in that first confrontation. On the way out, while reporters desperately tried to obtain statements about rumors of a corporate revolution at the Alistair Group, Roger and Antonia escaped through an alternative exit. It was just the first step, she commented as they walked down a side street. The road will be long, but necessary, Roger completed. I can no longer look at the world as I did before. Weeks turned into months of intense negotiation. The transformation of the Alistair Group became a case study in business schools and a topic of intense debate in economic circles. While some analysts predicted the imminent collapse of the conglomerate, others recognized the pioneering nature of the initiative in a global scenario increasingly attentive to corporate responsibility. In parallel with the corporate restructuring, Roger established the Aruanda Foundation, an independent institution dedicated to preserving and disseminating traditional Brazilian knowledge, connecting it with formal academic research. The Foundation's first project was the complete digitization of the Aruanda manuscript, making it accessible to researchers and traditional communities throughout the country. On a sunny Sunday, almost a year after his first visit to Project SO, Roger participated in the inauguration of the initiative's new headquarters, an educational complex built on land donated by his foundation. Unlike the corporate ceremonies he was accustomed to, there was no cordon separating authorities from the community. Children ran freely through the space, elderly people shared stories with young university students, and representatives of indigenous and Quilombola communities conversed with academic researchers. In a corner of the main hall, protected by a modern dome but still accessible to all, the Aruanda manuscript occupied a prominent position. Beside it, an interactive screen allowed navigation through its digital version, enriched with contemporary contributions from various communities. Antonia approached Roger, who was silently observing the activity. "What are you thinking about? About how I was blind for so long? I built an empire based on such a limited view of success." She smiled. "Hayes, who is this gentleman who helped build our new school?" Before Antonia could answer, Roger knelt down to the child's level. "I'm just someone who is learning that real value is not measured by the possessions we accumulate, but by the knowledge we share." The girl seemed to reflect deeply on those words before responding with the disconcerting wisdom of children. As that phrase from the manuscript we studied yesterday says, "Wisdom kept is like a seed in the cupboard. It never becomes a tree." Roger smiled, genuinely touched. True knowledge is like that. Once we find it, we can no longer return to our former ignorance. At that moment, a girl of approximately 10 years old, a student of the project, approached them. Ms. Exactly. And you? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be like Ms. Hayes, teach people to think. I can't imagine a nobler goal. As the girl walked away, Roger and Antonia walked to the balcony that offered a panoramic view of the neighborhood. Willow Creek, which he had once seen only as a place to be avoided, now revealed itself as a complex mosaic of lives, stories, and potentialities. You know what impresses me most, he commented. How arrogant I was to think I could help this community. In truth, it was this community that saved me from a life of superficial meaning. Perhaps that is the true lesson of the Aruanda manuscript, Antonia replied, contemplating the city's skyline, that the most valuable knowledge is that which transforms us from within, which rewrites our own story. In the courtyard below them, children from the community recited in unison a passage from the manuscript, a poem about how true freedom begins in critical thinking and shared consciousness. Their young voices carried ancient wisdom, passed down through generations, now strengthened by new resources and possibilities. Roger Alastair's empire did not crumble, as many predicted. It transformed, and in that transformation, he found a purpose that transcended financial balance sheets and market valuations, a legacy that could not be measured in figures, but in lives transformed by access to knowledge. The Aruanda manuscript, which he had once tried to buy for millions, had given him an invaluable gift, the understanding that true value lies not in possession, but in sharing, not in accumulation, but in the generous circulation of knowledge. And so on a sunny afternoon in the periphery of London, among curious children and well-thumbed books, the man once known as the Ruthless smiled, finally at peace with his own path and with the legacy he had chosen to build. Dear listeners, we hope that Roger Alastair's journey has touched your hearts and provoked reflections on the true value of knowledge in our lives. To continue exploring transformative stories like this one, we have prepared a special playlist that you will find by clicking the link to your left. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexities of British life and the paths of personal transformation. After all, as the Aruanda manuscript teaches us, true wisdom is that which circulates freely, like the air we all breathe. We look forward to seeing you in our next narrative.